You've probably noticed listening to different sermons or in your small group that not all Christians use the same translation of the Bible. Now, why is that? Why are there so many different translations? And how do I know what God is trying to say to me or which one I should trust? Most translations of the Bible are equally valid. And if you line up 10 different translations, they're going to all say basically the same thing, only in slightly different language. Now, they'll all draw upon basically the same original documents. So let me give you a little bit of background about how translation works. The original authors wrote in the languages that they knew, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And those writings were circulated and widely copied so that more and more people had access to Scripture. And in the New Testament period, it wasn't long before Christianity spread to regions that didn't speak Hebrew or Greek, and so the Bible had to be translated. Christianity is a faith for all peoples, and so translation of the Bible has always been important. Now, I want you to know that you can trust the translation process. Translations are almost always made by teams of biblical scholars, experts in the original languages as well as in theology, and they're made directly from the ancient Hebrew and Greek manuscripts. Now, new translations of the Bible will always be needed because language continues to change over time. English has changed a lot since the King James Version of the Bible was translated almost 400 years ago. So new translations continue to be produced. We want the Bible to always be readable. New translations of the Bible will also be needed because cultural changes are reflected in language. For example, it hasn't been that long ago that words like man or mankind refer to humanity as a whole, including both genders. But that's not the case anymore, so some of the contemporary translations take into account how English has changed, and they'll use words like people or men and women instead of just men. And then new translations are always needed because scholarship continues to improve. So in light of all that, what makes the contemporary translations different from each other? Well, there are two main factors. One is that each translation is aimed at a certain reading level. So sentence structure will be more or less complicated. The vocabulary might be larger or smaller. After all, when I translate from one language to another, there's more than one way to say the same thing. The other factor in why translations are different is because they feature different philosophy or approach of translation. Some translations are more word for word, some are more thought for thought. Every translation takes into account the need for both word for word and thought for thought translation processes, so it's more of a spectrum than two rigid types, but all are faithful, accurate translations. Now, there are some translations that I would counsel you to avoid. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses have their own translation called the New World Translation, and it distorts the Bible to favor their own unique doctrines. Now, some Bibles also are paraphrases, which is not a true translation, like the Message or the Living Bible. A paraphrase has its place, but you get a lot of interpretation mixed in, so I tend to avoid paraphrases. And to be honest, I think you should avoid the King James Version, because the archaic language of the King James Version makes it hard to read and harder to understand God's message for you. So I usually read or recommend 5 different translations, without necessarily saying they're the only ones: the New International Version, the New Living Translation, the New American Standard Bible, the English Standard Version, and the New King James Version. Now let me wrap up by giving you some ideas about how to choose a Bible. You don't have to be limited to just one translation. I read from different translations, so sometimes that way a different translation can get through to me in a fresh way. You should choose a Bible based on other features also besides a translation, because every given translation can be packaged in many different ways. So publishers often add helpful study tools, maps, intros to the books, different study notes. There's different bindings you could choose: leather or softcover, hardcover. So when it comes to buying a Bible, first choose the translation, then second choose how it's packaged. Now, I think it's important to think about the version that your church typically uses. Some churches have reasons to favor one translation over another, so you might want to ask a pastor what your church uses and why. But bottom line, choose one that you'll actually read. But the point is, read it, believe it, put it into practice. So take some time now and talk about how to find the right Bible for you.